the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, a best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And in this edition of the show, I'm not going to number the episodes. At this point, you will see it on the show description. But over the next couple of weeks, I am recording 14 opponent previews. It's that time of year, one of my favorite times of the year for the podcast, where I get to bring on the NFL Wire writers that I work with and along, that we only kind of interact one with another a little bit on Slack. And we've got a new face because the last time the Cardinals played the Browns, we had a different managing editor. So I'd like to welcome Cory Kinnan from the Browns Wire, who's been managing the site. How long have you? How long has it been? Has it been over a year?
Just under. So I started it in like week 2 of this past season. So I wasn't there for the Panthers game, but I remember I was on for the Jets game, which was week 2. So yeah, it's moved pretty quickly.
All right. Well,
maybe that was week 3. Yeah, I don't remember.
I've been covered. I've been doing this show since 2013. I started when I was with SB Nation, but I've been with the NFL Wire now since 2016. So yeah, Cardinals fans and Browns fans know what sadness is. They know what disappointment is, and the Cardinals will be on the road to face the Browns in Week 9. It won't be Kyler Murray versus Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield is no longer in Cleveland. We hope Kyler Murray is healthy by Week 9. I believe he will be, but we will have to wait and see on that. So what I'd like to do, Cory, is kind of go back to last season and then move forward. Let's start with the 2022 season. How did that go? What were the results compared to the expectations that you entered last year?
Yeah, so I mean, 2022 was probably, which for saying this as a Browns fan and somebody who covers the Browns, that was one of the weirder seasons in probably franchise history, saying a lot, considering they went 1-31 in a 2-year stretch back in 2016, 2017. But, just starting with the offseason with the trade for a highly volatile quarterback in Deshaun Watson, and just kind of the tailspin that set their offseason into. They still spent pretty decent money. They still added some pretty decent free agents, but one of those being Jacoby Brissett to play quarterback for, at that time, they thought 6 games. They thought they kind of knew it wasn't going to be a full year. I think everybody kind of imagined it wouldn't be a full year, but and so going in with 6 games, and it's such a hard thing to cover the team objectively from a football perspective. And that's what I'm doing my best here to do, is from a football perspective. Deshaun Watson was coming off of the last time he had played football, coming off of a nearly 5,000 yard season, was a half a football away from taking the Texans to the Super Bowl. That was the year before that, obviously. But so there was reason to believe, okay, the Browns just acquired objectively on the football field a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And then it came down that it was 6 games, and then it was appealed, and then they settled on 11 games. And then it's like, okay, expectations alter, obviously. Now you're starting a journeyman quarterback who has in his career spot started for a lot of teams in situations. So again, Andrew Luck retires, Jacoby Brissett steps in. Andrew Luck is injured, Jacoby Brissett stepped in. Before Andrew Luck retired, Tua Tagovailoa gets injured, Jacoby Brissett steps in. Tom Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo both get hurt, Jacoby Brissett steps. So this is a role that he's used to. And honestly, with the Browns last year, that was the longest notice he'd ever gotten in his NFL career, that, hey, I'm going to be starting games in the NFL on any team that he'd been on. But at the end of the day, it was Jacoby Brissett. And so expectations were, if these first 11 games, they can win 5 of them, those last 6, they've got a chance to make some noise. They won 4. And obviously the last 6, they didn't make a whole lot of noise. They went 3-3 in the last 6 when Watson returned from the suspension. So I think Looking at it, I think they probably fared as well as you would thought the Browns would fare. I think in Cleveland there were expectations they can win 9 games. They could squeeze out 9, 10 games, and they won 7. That might have been asking too much of Jacoby Brissett, who for a large part of the season played like a very efficient quarterback. I think he was top 10 in a lot of efficiency metrics for just being able to play point guard and distribute the ball where it needed to be. Again, he's not a guy that's going to extend outside of pockets. He's not a guy that's going to really give you anything outside of structure, but he's a guy who knows how to win, and he's a guy who knows how to distribute on schedule. So I thought he kept the offense afloat for the most part. Again, they lost a lot of like really back-breaking games early in the season that came back to bite him. So being up 31-17 on the Jets with less than 2 minutes and losing that game, like that's terrible. Going into Atlanta and giving up 200 yards rushing to Marcus Mariota, and it wasn't even Tyler Algier. It was like a running back fresh off the practice squad. Rushed for over 100 yards on him. Again, just a tumultuous run defense. 32nd in the league in run defense. So a lot of backbreaking things that happened throughout the season that by the time it got to week 12, it's like, okay, well, you have to win all 6 if you want a shot. And they didn't. So I would say it was below expectations, but again, hindsight's always 20/20. It's easy to say, well, those should have been the expectations, but you can't really do that.
And when you got to see Watson, now that was that contract, first and foremost, kind of shocked the entire NFL. I know that the ownership situation in Cleveland is much different when it comes to their deep pockets, and they do have the capital available to this little known rule that's been throughout the NFL that existed back when the league was still, you never knew if it was going to make it year to year, and they had to put the amount guaranteed money, I think it's for this year, next year, into an escrow account, which really handcuffs a lot of franchises, especially if it's a family-owned team. The Browns didn't care. We're going to guarantee the whole thing, which for the players is an excellent thing to see. It kind of sets the precedent that you can do that. But looking at Watson's performance, how do you think he looked? For a lot of outsiders, he looked like a quarterback who hadn't played since 2020. Did you see enough in his performance to believe he is still capable of reaching at least near the caliber that he was in 2020?
I would say there were glimpses. I would say it's not as easy as, well, of course he hasn't played since 2020, and of course he didn't play well. Like, he didn't play like the quarterback he was in Houston. But I think there were elements to, especially from a head coach / play calling perspective from Kevin Stefanski. The quarterbacks that he has called plays for his entire career as a play caller have been Kirk Cousins, Baker Mayfield, and Jacoby Brissett. 3 quarterbacks that aren't going to do what Deshaun Watson can do, and especially 11 games, 12 weeks into the season, to ask your play caller, your head coach, to completely turn his offense on his head. I would say wasn't feasible. So I think it was more Deshaun trying to fit into what the offense had already established. Of course, they added some RPOs. They added some of their jet motion and fun wrinkles that they'll continue to add this year. But when you're 11, 12 weeks into the season, you can't really, especially when you're talking about your offensive line, your tackles are used to not having to worry about your quarterback breaking structure, breaking protection, to now, like, oh my gosh, my quarterback is on my left shoulder when he's not inside the pocket. Like, there's a lot of adjustments, going from strictly under center to gun run for Nick Chubb. And so there's quarterback or wide receivers not knowing how to work the scramble drill because they've never had to with Baker Mayfield or Jacoby Brissett, because those guys aren't working the scramble drill. If they're break and contain, then there's something seriously wrong. So I think there's a little bit more to it than Watson didn't play up to snuff, but Watson didn't play up to snuff. So I think that's the easy way to say it. Now with the full offseason, an opportunity for Kevin Stefanski and Deshaun Watson to completely revamp and kind of work together to mold an offense that fits his strengths, and then to give the offensive line a full training camp, to give Nick Chubb a full training camp, to give these wide receivers a full training camp of all working together, I think is a different circumstance than trying to flip an offense on its head 12 weeks into the season.
The Cardinals have some Browns connections now, obviously, as Drew Petzing, Petzing, who did a number of things with Cleveland, the last year quarterbacks coach, now the offense coordinator here. Quarterback coaching, like how one views a quarterback coach, is hard to do because they're under the radar. The offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, the ones who talk to the media, you never hear from the quarterback's coach. How do you feel his move to the Cardinals will impact things moving forward?
From a Cleveland perspective or an Arizona perspective?
For y'all?
Okay. Yeah. So, not a whole lot. So again, what happened was Drew Petzing he got an offensive coordinator interview the year before with the Las Vegas Raiders when Josh McDaniel got hired. And so the Browns then promoted him to quarterback coach. He was the tight ends coach before that. So gave him a promotion to say, hey, we understand you're getting pull from around the league now. So, and before that, Alex Van Pelt, who is the offensive coordinator, was also the quarterback coach. And now that Petzing's gone, it's just Alex Van Pelt again. So it's more of the same. Not a huge overhaul because it's just back to kind of how it was outside of that 1 year where Petzing was the quarterback coach.
All right, coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move to the offseason and talk free agency. Where did they see movement, losses, and additions? That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move to the offseason talk, free agency. Corey, what did we see happen with the Browns this offseason? Who were their impact losses? Who were the impact additions? And who were some lower key signings as well?
Yeah, so impact losses, there weren't really any, which is it's great to hear, to see. Really, the only players walking that were big contributors last year were high-paid players that didn't produce to their contract. So we're talking about Jadeveon Clowney, still unsigned, made $10 million last year. We're talking about John Johnson III, still unsigned, made $13 million last year. Talking about Kareem Hunt, who I think just made $4 or $5 million, but for a running back, like didn't produce last year. He's clearly lost some juice. So like, as far as major losses go, there really aren't any. They're bringing back pretty much their whole offense with some other key contributors added. Defensively, they revamped their front seven, obviously, because they really needed to. Their defensive line, especially because, again, 32nd in the league in run defense, and they just got gashed against everybody they played. So, and then, yeah, so I wouldn't say that they really had a major loss, but the notable names would be Jadeveon Clowney, John Johnson III, Kareem Hunt. John Johnson III was cut. Clowney and Hunt, both of their contracts expired, and neither has really been even reported to have interest.
And Hunt is a guy I would almost expect the Cardinals to add before training camp, but that's just all of that has been speculation. There's been nothing like the connection is there. You've got Petzing who comes from that offense. Who you want two quality running backs, two capable running backs. They've got James Conner, Kareem Hunt, who is number 2 to Bradley Chubb. It makes all the sense in the world. So that Nick Chubb, not Bradley Chubb. So the additions. Tell us about who are on the Browns this coming year that weren't on before from free agency.
Yeah. So again, starting with the defensive front, I guess is, with the Browns, that's where you have to start because again, they were just so putrid. They swung for Javon Hargrave. He was down to the Browns and the 49ers and chose the 49ers. They swung on Draymond Jones. The Browns actually offered Draymond Jones more money, but the Seahawks guaranteed him a ton in the first year, and the Browns just don't have the cap structure to guarantee the bulk of the contract in the first year. So he chose Seattle. They swung, and they finally hit on the third defensive tackle in the market in Dalvin Tomlinson. So who I actually would argue, from a well-rounded, all-around perspective, is probably a better fit than Draymond Jones, who I think is more of a gap shooter, pass rush guy, but against the run, I don't think he's super solid. So for a team that needs an overhaul against the run, I think Dalvin Tomlinson is a better fit, and for $4 million cheaper per year. So Dalvin Tomlinson's the big one. Sticking with the Vikings defensive line, I guess they go out and they get Zadarius Smith for a pick swap as well. So again, he'll only be here for a year. At least that's what his contract states. Who knows? Jadeveon Clowney was only here for a year. They brought him back for a second. If he really likes playing opposite Myles Garrett and the Browns are willing to give him a decent amount of money, he might be back. But those are the two big names. And then they went out and they signed Ogbo Okoronkwo, who was with the Houston Texans and then the Los Angeles Rams before that, who efficiency-wise is one of the better pass rushers based on pressure rates. His snap count's never been high. And with Zadarius Smith and Myles Garrett, like they just really need him to be a designated pass rusher, which he's going to have the opportunity to do, rotate in when one of those guys needs to come off the field and run downs as well. But so they have a pretty formidable pass rush now with Smith, Garrett, and Okoronkwo with Tomlinson inside. Again, they let John Johnson walk, but they did go out and they signed Juan Thornhill from the Kansas City Chiefs, 2-time Super Bowl winner, former second-round pick, highly athletic. again, with Johnson, they tried to in Los Angeles, he thrived in the box and in the slot. And they tried to kind of shove a round peg into a square hole and play him over the top as a deep third safety, and it just didn't work. That's not where he thrived. He didn't have a feel for it. And it was kind of a waste of money. But now they have a guy who's used to being a free safety, a true post safety, playing deep third of the field. And that will take a lot of pressure off of two three talented corners and Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, Martin Emerson. So those are the most notable ones. Again, you have to talk about on the offensive side of the ball as well. Moving back, just doing a pick swap with the New York Jets, moving back 32 slots and landing Elijah Moore as well. Former second-round player, hasn't really panned out in New York. But again, tape shows, metrics show that he's always open and just really suffered from some pretty bad quarterback play. So I think Moore's skill set and just the depth at the wide receiver position, I think he automatically comes in and is that second option in the wide receiver room behind Amari Cooper. So that's a pretty big add as well.
Let's talk draft. So you mentioned some moves in the draft that didn't land you draft. They acquired players. Who are the impact additions for the Browns for the draft, and who do you like, and who do you like to contribute this year, either at a big time level or maybe in a little bit?
Yeah, so that's really hard to talk about a significant contributor in year one for a team that had no first and second round picks. So, 2 third-round picks, Cedric Tillman, wide receiver out of Tennessee. Again, he has he's pretty quick. Big body dude, 6'3", 210. And he has a skill set that none of the wide receivers in the room have, and the ability to win above the rim and at the catch point. So when you're talking red zone, when you're talking downfield shots, I think there's naturally going to be a role for him, again, because he has a skill set that maybe Donovan Peoples-Jones has, but Donovan Peoples-Jones is pretty categorically one of the worst separators in the NFL at the wide receiver position. So again, some of the better hands, some of the better contested catch numbers in the league, but he cannot get open. So I think Cedric Tillman has a role just because he has a skill set that nobody else in the room has. Second, third round pick was Siaki Ika, defensive tackle out of Baylor. Again, when we're talking about overhauling a defensive tackle room, and outside of Dalvin Tomlinson, and again, they signed a couple guys to like little guaranteed money where they're not roster locks. Maurice Hurst, who's had some flash in the pans, but can't stay healthy with Oakland and San Francisco. And then Tristan Hill, who was drafted in the second round by the Cowboys.
He was on the Cardinals last season.
He was on the Cardinals last season, kind of has a reputation for a bit of a dirty player.
Yes, he does.
So those two guys were kind of brought in to throw in the back of the room and say, fight it out with these guys, provide some competition. But outside of Tomlinson, there was really no locks added. So I think naturally, again, for a team that was bad against the run, adding an anchor like Ika, you're going to find the field. Whether that's 15 snaps a game, you're going to find the field. So those are the two. Outside of that, we got some depth pieces. So Isaiah McGuire to Missouri is going to provide he's going to see snaps in the edge rotation with guys like Alex Wright, Okoronkwo, Garrett Smith. They didn't add a linebacker. And then probably the other guy that might see the field a bit as well. Cameron Mitchell, 5th round pick out of Northwestern, just because the Browns love secondary depth. They will go out of their way to add more secondary depth. And he has a pretty prolific profile, both playing in the slot, in the box, and on special teams. So just being scrappy, being a willing tackler, he's going to see the field as well, at least on special teams. Outside of that, they drafted for the future. So used a 4th round pick on offensive tackle DeJuan Jones, used a 5th round pick on a future backup quarterback in Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So 6th round pick on the center Luke Whippler. So a lot of depth pieces moving in that won't see the field in year one, but could in year two potentially.
Interesting, because Whippler was a guy that we had our eyes on and felt that probably around round 3 he was going to go, and then he kept dropping and they kept.
I have no idea why,
but it's interesting with the Whippler pick because we kind of thought that we could plug him in as their starter first year, because right now the start is going to be Yelda Froholt, and you're
Cleveland
probably
Browns,
one of the only people in the world who even knows who that player is. And his four games of playing, he on the Cardinals roster has the most experience playing center in the NFL. He's the only one with any NFL starts, with 4 NFL starts at center. The entire rest of the roster has 0. And he's slated to start right now. So looking forward to that, maybe.
Not your ideal situation.
No, I mean, they like him, but like I've always felt that they were going to go out and get another guy to start in his place, and that he would fill that role that he had in Cleveland, which was backup guard center, which he's capable of doing. Yes. Coming up next on the Rest of Sierra podcast, that's our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to look ahead to 2023. They're kind of what Cory expects out of the Browns this season, high-end expectations, low-end expectations, and how they view the Cardinals. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast. It's our Cardinals talk on the web. The final segment, we will talk about the 2023 outlook for the Cleveland Browns, whom the Cardinals will face on the road in Week 9. I'm talking to Cory Kinnan from BrownsWire.com, sister side of the Cards Wire, my site. Cory, so we look ahead to this season, coming off that 7-win campaign. Do the Browns have playoff expectations, or is it more playoff hopes?
I would say that expectations. If they don't, their head coach might be in trouble. Again, he won Coach of the Year his rookie season as a head coach in 2020. Took Baker Mayfield-led offense to the playoffs on the back of some pretty heavy play action scheme shots, which the league has kind of figured out. And I would say this is probably the first year he's had maybe a quarterback that he feels comfortable opening up the playbook for. Again, they were very, very aggressive in free agency, adding names in the trade market, adding Zadarius Smith, Elijah Moore. So they have expectations. And I truly think if they don't make the playoffs, we might see a new head coach in Cleveland next year, even in like a 9-win season, 10-win season and miss the playoffs. Like, I don't know if they'll be back. They fired both of their coordinators, and they hired Jim Schwartz in the defensive coordinator position and Bubba Ventrone as a special teams coordinator, both very highly thought of in both of those regards. So coaching isn't an excuse. Your poorly ranked run defense is an excuse. Your lack of a quarterback for 11 games isn't an excuse. They're truly out of excuses. And if they don't make the playoffs, then again, they're out of excuses. So that just is what it is. So I think they're capable of winning 11 games. I truly do. But again, the AFC North is the Ravens and the Bengals are very tough teams. So
and the Steelers are never bad. That's
a Tomlin coach team will never be out of it. Yeah. A Tomlin coach team will never give up a fight. So it's a very tough division. And when you think about the AFC West is also very tough. All of the wildcard teams aren't going to come out of the AFC North. So it's going to be a dogfight.
It sounds like it. Now, obviously, the Cleveland fans have expectations for the postseason. How do they view the Cardinals this season? And so I can probably guess the answer, but how do they view that Week 9 game against Arizona? Is it is it chalk it up, we're going to win that one? Is it one they're going to have to keep their eyes on, or is it one of those, I'm not even going to say the other ones. Is it one they might think they might lose? No, the Cardinals are going to be bad.
From the outside looking in, I would say the Cardinals roster is both very young and decimated at this current juncture. Is what I would say. And I think a lot depends on whether Kyler Murray plays or not. But from the outside looking in, it seems like the Cardinals are in a position where they can allow Paris Johnson and their young guys to have a year to kind of settle in. Give the coaching staff a year to kind of settle in. Again, especially with the injury to Kyler Murray. Again, they could shock the world. But from the outside looking in, I would think that should be a relatively not easy game. There's no easy games, but a game the Browns should win by 2 scores, I would say.
Does that change if it's Kyler? If you're going with the assumption that Kyler's starting that game, do the expectations the Browns have for that game change? Obviously, if it's Colt McCoy, yeah. Oh, we've seen Colt McCoy play.
I've seen Colt McCoy play.
You saw Colt McCoy play early in his career. Side note about Colt McCoy, I believe he entered the league about 10 years too early. If he'd have entered, and the shoulder injury too, if he'd have come into the league healthy 10 years later, he'd have been a star. He was a star in college and just didn't have the juice in his arm to start out his career in Cleveland. But man, has he stuck around for a long time. He's going to make more this year.
Has.
He's going to make more this year than he's ever made in his career. He's going to make $3.75 million. That's the highest salary he's had in his entire career.
backup quarterback's a good gig if you can hang around. You can be a good leader, a good like presence in the locker room, and he's proven like with Washington, he's spot started some games and won some games. So like everywhere he's gone, he's at least started some games and like again, he's not a high end quarterback, but like he can operate an offense. So like
Yes.
that'll get you to hang around. I would say even with Kyler, looking at the rosters, the Browns should have expectations of winning that game.
Especially, I mean, it is a home game, but there we go. What would be for you the low end? So you think that they can win 11 games, potentially challenging for the AFC North title, I would imagine. What would be their floor for this season? Let's assume not an injury to Deshaun Watson. That would obviously derail the entire season.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think their floor is entering this year?
Yeah, so the floor would be losing every game that I would imagine would be like a close opponent. So aside from divisional, whenever I do like a schedule prediction, I always just assume a 3-3 split when I do division, whatever.
Same.
We'll win one, you'll lose one, whatever. But the worst case scenario would be losing to teams like San Francisco, would be losing to teams like Seattle, Jacksonville, the Jets, losing all of those games. Again, I think they're capable of winning all of those games. I don't think they will. I think, but if you go out and you lose all four of those games against, teams that also have playoff aspirations, then that kind of tells you who you are as a team. So, and again, if they lose all four of those games, then they're probably looking at 7-8 wins, and that's not great. The 7-win season again for the third straight year is not a good look. So that would be worst case scenario, I would say.
If we're looking between a 7 and 11 win team, that is not a bad place to be in, but it is a frustrating place to be in.
It's a purgatorish kind of place to be. Yeah.
The Cardinals this year, now I have optimistic, I think this team could be 3-win bad. I think they'll win 3 games. I don't think that, but I think honestly, I believe that Kyler's going to come back around week 6 and that they'll play roughly 500 after his return. I think that this Jonathan Gannon coaching is going to take a roster of defensive players, which doesn't look good, but will make them scrappy, tough, and competitive. And by the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised to see them win 6 or 7 games. They're not going to compete with the playoffs, but they're going to look like a team with promise moving forward. And I pegged the Browns game as a game that could be a potential upset, but I don't think I picked it at that way. But again, the Cardinals have beaten the Browns the last few times. That Kyler Murray had Baker Mayfield's number. No more Baker Mayfield to do that. This will be against the Deshaun Watson team. Thank you, Cory, for your time. This has been a fantastic and kind of get more insight to a team that we really don't like. It feels like we played a lot more recently than we have in the last 20 years. Because the Cardinals had that 17th game was against the Browns, which changed things up, which actually I think is going to be really nice for the other conference teams. So for us, AFC teams, we see once every 4 years, we get a sprinkle in another team here and there, because otherwise it's like we know nothing about them. And in terms of our interaction, it was like, we only know each other by name only.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Cory. For those who are listening, I know you guys are Cardinals fans, but if you have any interest on hitting up Cory or following him for his coverage about the Browns, Cory, how can my listeners follow you? Obviously, the Browns won.
Yeah, absolutely. Twitter is still running. So for now, fake Cory Kinnan on Twitter. It was real Cory Kinnan before they took my check mark away. But now it's fake Cory Kinnan.
Have you joined the threads? Yes.
I have. I'm not super active though. I'm not somebody who's like trying to build a brand over there yet. So, but I also am a draftnik as well. So I have my own Substack for NFL draft content called Daft on Draft. Again, just a little play on words there, some fun stuff. And so I do some draft content as well over there. So
perfect. Well, I appreciate the time, Cory. Thank you so much. We will be in contact, I think, during the season when we will do our questions exchanged. At least that'll be the very minimum. Maybe we'll hear from each other.
Yeah.
Thanks for the show. Thanks for the time, Cory. That will wrap this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. We will be back soon with one of our other opponent previews. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red C, be Red C-Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.
Rise up! Rise